Welcome to the Communicating Capital podcast, where finance, business, and communication get a fresh perspective. Hosted by a team of women in the industry, we're here to redefine the conversation with candid, no-nonsense interviews featuring leaders shaping how capital, companies, and ideas are moving through the world. So on today's podcast, we're going to actually focus on how these stories earn trust. A lot of the times we're talking about what companies are building, but we're going to look at it from a different angle. Our guest today is someone I deeply admire as a communications professional and strategist. Her name is Amanda Coffey, and she's the founder of Coffey Communications, a consultancy that's focused on elevating the relevance and reputation of capital of AI-first startups through innovative, credible storytelling. She brings more than 15 years of experience leading comms at some of the most recognizable global brands, including PayPal, Under Armour, and eBay, of which we will talk about through this podcast. She's based in New York City, so she's also deeply embedded in the media ecosystem. She hosts regular events that brings reporters and editors together across tech, business, and finance. She's known for her ability to help executives show up clearly, credibly, and with authenticity in a media environment that has changed dramatically over the last decade. Amanda, welcome to Communicating Capital. I'm so excited to have you here.
Yeah, it's so great to be here.
So before we dive in, I do want to frame today's conversation for our listeners. The episode is going to plan to go way beyond grabbing headlines or viral moments. We want to drive home relevance, trust, access, and how communication leaders can help companies earn credibility in a world where audiences have become more skeptical, more informed, and way more distracted than ever. So Amanda, I know you've seen this evolution firsthand, so I want to start at the beginning. Your career at a time 10 to 15 years ago was when landing a big headline was it. Like that was your end all be all goal. Can you tell us what has changed in the role of communications over the last 10 to 15 years?
Yeah, so you're right. I started my career at two big PR agencies at Burson and Weber, and then I spent 15 years at eBay and PayPal. And I feel what is the big shift is communications people are finally in a position where they can draw data from communication strategies to business impact. So, for example, when I was at Under Armour, we had told the street, I was in Under Armour, this was in 2023, that Under Armour is known for footwear, and we have footwear innovation, but it wasn't showing up in press. So my team and I did a campaign where we started with local press. We did trade press, fashion press, and then also did a weekend feature in the Wall Street Journal. And we were able to measure that and show that message cut through of footwear and Under Armour was close to zero, and then it bumped up. So it's just like in this new age of AI and being able to track reputation capital, it's like really refreshing that now we're not at odds with our peers in marketing. We can measure almost as much, and it's only getting better.
So talking about Under Armour, Amanda, you've led communications at massive global brands, PayPal, Under Armour, eBay, and now you work closely with early stage AI companies. What surprised you most about that transition, and where do startup founders most misunderstand communications?
Yeah, so I feel like one really helpful anecdote that's like a modern age of where we stand with AI and media that's really resonated with founders is two things. One, if you aren't willing to tell the story, like why would a journalist tell the story?
Mhm.
And then, for example, Business Insider, 70% of their reporters use AI for the first draft of their story. So we all know people use it for editing, but now a lot of writers are being told to leverage AI to get the draft out. So in theory, if you have like a great piece of content that's more of an outside-in piece of content, like how your product is disrupting the healthcare industry.
Right.
Or, a healthcare VC reporter could take that blog post, feed into their enterprise AI, and use it for the first draft. So oftentimes when these early stage AI companies come to me, like candidly, a lot of times their product isn't so differentiated compared to the market. So the way that they can get out ahead is storytelling and showing that they're leading their industry and they have a point of view on their industry. But you wouldn't be behooving yourself to not have at least like 4 or 5 good pieces of content that you could both give to journalists. And I feel like I don't know a journalist today that doesn't you know, do a bit of basic research because they can't cut corners. So they want to make sure that you aren't cutting corners too. So they want, when they put in ChatGPT about the industry, you should show up. It should be linking to your site. So I feel like that just basic brand hygiene is so critical, especially now with large language models. And then what's also been really encouraging is not so long ago, I would get pushback from executives that, they didn't want to meet with press unless it was guaranteed coverage. And now I think everybody understands how valuable it is to listen and learn and build a relationship and not be transactional. So I've gotten great response for, especially in person, to convene people just to get to know each other and learn about the business.
Love it. And I know that we talk about capital across our podcast with different operators that are not only just in PR, but ones that are running companies, VCs, et cetera. But you talk about reputation as capital. So reputation capital. And you also talk about relevance, not just visibility. How do you define relevance today? And why is it more valuable than reach and impressions?
Yeah. So Franz Pasha, who was the chief corporate affairs officer at PayPal, he just recently started running the corporate affairs model at Verizon. This is something that I
Nice.
learned from him about building reputation capital. When you think of bigger companies that are in very interesting times, like you think of PayPal as a regulated company, eBay's a marketplace. So a lot of your employees or sellers are global and they're not full-time employees. You have a large community. So knowing who your key stakeholders are and making sure that they understand your business and they have some basic level of trust is so critical. I feel like a lot of companies their planning process started when a crisis happened. And now companies understand the value of making a first connection, making sure there's basic understanding and that you have some really good relationships that you might, and it's like a bank, like you want to put money in the reputation bank and let it grow and earn interest, and you might have to take it out later, but it benefits you so much more to get to know them. So a good example is with all your beat reporters, or reporters that you work with, making sure they can put a face to a name, that you ask them, what does their editor want? What stories perform the best. I've even had conversations with reporters about how their compensation is structured, because often it's structured by certain metrics. And then you end up being able to suggest sources like third-party validators, like analysts or your customers that you have a relationship with that'll speak greatly on your behalf. And then you just get these invaluable insights. Like a good example is office tours. Like office tours perform so well. And a lot of companies I've advocated to do them because I hear from the reporter, their editors love them. They get lots of clicks. And there's a lot of white space for the comms team to be creative and say when our athlete comes to campus, this is what they can do. And then you learn things that your C-suite might be over rotating on. A good example would be earnings stories, because you hear from the reporter, those are written by AI now, they're templatized, it's a different editor team, so there's really not as much fluidity. So I feel like one result of this theme of building reputation capital is I've seen a lot of big comms organizations take reputation risk and crisis out from the silo. In a lot of larger comms organizations, it was a separate team, and now it's part of the main comms team, because everybody should be thinking how to do offense and defense at the same time.
I love that. I love the idea. So I feel like you have a lot of creativity in the work that you do, and it's saying something. So a lot of times with communications professionals, I mean, not anymore, but it used to be so transactional and now it's so relationship focused, and it should always have been that way. So I love that. And one thing I do want to touch on is your approach to access. You mentioned access in different conferences and different speeches that you've had. What does it actually mean in practice, and why does it matter so much to reporters and audiences today?
Yeah, so I think one thing that's been really helpful, because I feel like a lot of being a successful communicator is managing up and setting expectations and showing your work. When you send out media coverage, really taking a step back and thinking about, if a board member read this and they weren't so familiar, would they understand how strategic this was and how it's driving the business forward? So for bigger stories, you need, tension. There needs to be a protagonist and an antagonist. And if you're working on a bigger feature, it's, really helpful. I mean, journalists have to have journalist integrity, but you should basically know what the tension's going to be. The best kind of tension is using the industry as attention, like digital payments are a one-way street, sportswear is on the rise, and like how your company plays with that tension. Another way to curate it is to really curate the way that you provide access to a media outlet. Once in my career, I worked on like a large fast company feature, and they had to do lots of reporting. And we really worked with the reporter to say like what were different elements of the business she was most interested in and how we could have those experiences with her, whether it was like shadowing the CEO when he won an award in his industry, when he met with different employees. Think of it this way: you end up actually, in a lot of ways, lowering the risk for the story. So a good example for access is it doesn't always need to be the CEO or CFO. A lot of times when you're doing storytelling, it's better to use a subject matter expert, because when you use an employee as a spokesperson or a customer, if it's a third party validator, it's very, authentic, and their talk track is very clear, and it has got guardrails. So there was a year where we didn't at PayPal, I kind of fell into learning. So we couldn't use our C-suite because our CEO was departing at the end of the year. And it was clear that we would get a new C-suite. So it was just not in our best interest to put them forward. So we ended up having, an working mom who upskilled into being a technologist at the company, a intern who took advantage of their intern when they were remote. And it was the coverage and the great key messaging we got out of it was amazing. And I realized this is a great strategy because they can't ask the intern about the lawsuit that happened last week or about the activist investor or about what they think of the stock price. I just hosted a panel in San Francisco, and Alistair Barr, who's a tech editor there, he was talking about access. And I think when you're going to pitch a reporter a story, you need to be thoughtful about the access. I've had reporters tell me that they've gotten press releases and they've asked to speak to the person who was quoted, and that person's not available. That is not what you want to do. But there's things that you can do in between, like have a lot of day two earnings stories that I worked on. In order to bring that story to life, we would offer a customer who had had decided to invest in that technology or had seen the trend of the move to e-commerce or whatever the outside in trend is. Reporters love data and they love access, and the access can be a broader range than just your top company spokesperson.
Love it. Opening up access beyond the CEO is definitely the way to go nowadays. And you can control what they're talking. I mean, you can't always control what they're speaking of, but we do try to control the narrative as best as we can. I want to talk about authenticity and how you're shaping these people. So if they're not just the CEO and you're talking, let's say it's a medical company, you're talking to the chief medical officer, or if they have a customer and they're doing a customer or physician patient type of interview or something of the sort, how do you help them maintain authenticity within their interviews, especially the C-suite?
Yeah. So I feel like a couple things. When I've worked with more senior executives, one thing that I felt has been a really good kind of icebreaker is asking them things they learned in their childhood or earlier in their career that shape their leadership values. Because I feel like it's just really gets to the core who they are, and they don't get as defensive. I ran a podcast for the CEO of PayPal for 4 seasons, and it was interesting. In that podcast, we had 2 executives talk about their divorce, and people talked about all different things. Sometimes people are more private, but when they're even the most private person can say how their parent or someone who's influential in their childhood shaped them and their worldview. Yeah. That's a good way to kind of get them going. And then I think for authenticity, it's funny you mentioned that because I'm on Friday, so January 20th, I'm partnering with a sports reporter, Dylan, who runs the sport profile. And what's unique about his podcast, he asks every guest at the end, what do you admire most about yourself? I mean, he asks him what the core of the interview is what kind of stories do you want to be pitched? But he kind of gets to the root, and it's people have really opened up. Reporters spoke about how she's autistic, and that was really hard in her early career as a journalist and how she's overcome it. I do think getting to know people a little bit before and where they come from helps. My tip, if you're working with a spokesperson who might be a little nervous or this isn't normally part of their remit, they're like a site availability engineer and suddenly, you're having them speak, is kind of meet them where they're at. A lot of times with finance people, just putting stuff in Excel makes them more comfortable. With engineers, one thing I've used as a tactic that's worked really well is we create a 4-page PowerPoint, because they're used to PowerPoints, about their story, about, if the story is PayPal opened up this opportunity for them to become, have leadership skills as a technologist, why did you want to apply? What skills did you realize that were most critical? And what's like an aha moment or a little story? Because I think back to your question of authenticity, the ideal scenario with any kind of storytelling or interview is the PR person builds a great relationship with the reporter, understands what they need, educates the reporter, and then the spokesperson just comes in for like sound bites for things. And the most mediagenic sound bites are like little anecdotes or little stories. So you kind of get that spokesperson and kind of their origin story, like why this is relevant, why it mattered to them, and then like an anecdote. So an example is when PayPal had this program, and it was so great. I got to go to Omaha when we announced it to our employees that every employee became a shareholder, and the cost of healthcare went down. It was around just making sure everyone had good financial health, because a lot of our employees, even though they were being paid top of market, the hourly employees were living paycheck to paycheck. And then we had one employee talk about how he used to sell his plasma and still had trouble getting his kids Christmas gifts. And that was the lead of the story, the beginning. Like that, like if you have a story of like your financial insecurity, that's great. I also at PayPal, I worked on a CNBC story about equal pay, and they interviewed the CEO and the head of HR, but the like manager level female employee told the story of when her manager told her she wasn't being paid equally and she was getting a pay bump. And like that's what everybody wants to know. They want to know, was she mad that she was not being paid? Was she happy with the pay bump? So I think like getting your origin story and getting like your little story, because stories are so authentic, has been a great trick to, especially when you're under pressure, to get the story ready and the spokesperson comfortable.
I love that you're talking about that. I feel like the stories that you tell and the stories that are told can actually be quite powerful to not just large corporations like PayPal, excuse me, or eBay or something of the sort, but even like small businesses as well. So I find that to be inspiring just in general. And it shows that the work that we do is powerful. So.
Yeah, there's a comms tech company, Clipbook. And with their funding announcement, not only did they announce their funding, but they talked about how their CEO cold emailed Mark Cuban. And I'm like, that's what people want to read.
I've seen that. I saw that. I love it.
And then
those are powerful stories.
Yeah. And then they ended up later on publishing the email. So people want to know the behind the scenes.
They do.
And it's like so funny you mentioned that too, because I remember at one point asking Business Insider, and the top read story about PayPal was who reports to the CEO and what do they do?
Right.
Which is so funny because we're like, that's on our corporate website, but people just want that double click of like, what is this SVP oversee? Like, what would it be like to work with them? Like, people want to hear from people and know what it would be like to have a conversation at work for someone.
I love that. And you know what, when you're thinking about audiences, they're emerging. So we have like, of course, the boomer audience, we have the Gen X audience, we have the millennial audience, the Gen Z audience. I want to talk about your work with the Gen Z audience. It's not the easiest audience to get in front of because they believe in authenticity and they can see right through a lot of the stuff that used to be out years ago. What do brands and leaders consistently get wrong about Gen Z, and what actually earns their attention and trust?
The question that I get a lot, or the kind of feedback I get a lot, is like, Gen Z doesn't read the Wall Street Journal, which is like funny because they actually do. They just consume it in a different way. They get the headlines on TikTok. I've noticed the Wall Street Journal getting a lot richer in their video. Nike just did this really cool thing where they had their sports reporter Inti Pachenko like trying on all their jackets, and you could like really feel like you were an athlete in this showroom trying it on. So I do, I feel like the one miss is like just being so narrow-minded that like, Gen Z doesn't read this outlet or that outlet. They do. They just are getting more savvy of how to, make sure that they get access to the content.
True.
I think the opportunity is to think of more integrated, like social first approach. I'm actually going to share an interview with the deputy editor of InStyle on the 20th on my Substack, but this InStyle did this series, has this mockumentary TikTok series called The Intern, where they like kind of show behind the scenes of how different stories come together. And Fossil partnered with them. So instead of just like sponsoring like a typical ad or typical sponsorship, they were like part of the mockumentary series. And it looks so authentic and so cool to their storytelling. And they have, for example, Joe Jonas is in one of the episodes, and he designed the Fossil watch.
Oh, interesting.
And he was talking about like his experience, and then the editor-in-chief was interviewing him. So you really felt like it was behind the scenes. So I think the opportunity for brands when they're reaching Gen Z is thinking more of a social first approach, not just like we want this article or um, to live online, but like how do you create a more 360 program? Like at Under Armour, we worked with Marie Claire to send one of the first uh, professional female flag football quarterbacks to their event, and she created social content. She did a speaking opportunity. They did 2 articles around it. And I feel like we just got a lot more content that was a lot more dynamic that could be shared on social. But going to Under Armour and trying to reach 16 to 24-year-olds was a real kick in the butt because I was like really comfortable with the FT and like Barron's and Bloomberg. But the one thing that does give me hope is I feel like Gen Z is very entrepreneurial. That's what I love about them, that like they graduate and they're not like their identity isn't one company, like their identity is themselves. So I feel like they really want to get the business chops and the business acumen. So I have had success too when there's these good business opportunities thinking of how to work with Gen Z. So an example is the National Retail Federation conference. It's like their big show. It just happened for this year. It's every November. When I worked at Under Armour, Diamond Miller, who's like a young WNBA player, she actually moderated one of the sessions, which was so cool because typically like someone in their early 20s who's an athlete isn't at this like retail conference, but her and her agent said that she liked that ability to kind of understand what is it like these business decision makers in retail, what are they talking about? And she wanted to be part of the conversation. So, and some, I think social first for Gen Z, but like tap into their entrepreneurship. And if you have something that they can learn how to be an entrepreneur and learn about the business side, that's you can open up kind of a broader set of spokespeople and kind of have some interesting pairings with, with that more of the business side and more of the Gen Z who's coming up and who's on the ground floor with what people are really talking about and buying.
It's honestly so insightful. We don't necessarily work with the Gen Z audience as much on Elevate side, so it's interesting to hear this from your perspective. And something I've also noticed as you're discussing more and more about the folks that you work with, you're talking a lot about media people from different types of media. You're talking about sports, we're talking about financial media, we're talking about mainstream media, we're talking about weeklies, and you're finding ways to be of value to them, which I think is such a win in our industry, as you know. Can you tell us a little bit about what journalists actually need right now and how we can essentially be better partners to them?
Yeah. So it's funny you say that because one piece of advice I got early in my career, I was living in Marin County and commuting in to San Francisco to Burson when I was I think an intern or right out of school. And I had a book on the bus, and the headline to the book was like how to blog or something. It's like blogging was hot. Like YouTube launched when I was in college. This is like a different time, but it's funny to draw parallels when like a new technology kind of bug and pops up and people are just trying to grasp how to take advantage of it. And there was someone on the bus and he's like, if you want to learn about blogging, you should just try it. Like the best way to learn is to do it. So I've taken that advice again and again. And that's why, my friends were like, you make really silly videos on TikTok. And I'm like, I know it's embarrassing that I'm making videos on TikTok, but now I feel like I understand TikTok so much better because when I was just consuming the videos, like I understood, how my kind of, I could see my algorithm change and things, but I really of like how to make a video and what performs well once you start creating the content. And I even did a test and doing some user generated, like to get paid for content. It just makes you a lot more credible if you can speak from first person experience. So as in this last year, I've taken that to the level of I've done some contributed stories. So I have a column once a month where I interview journalists for PR Daily. And now I'm doing Substack newsletter, but then I've also contributed to Business Insider and Vogue Business. Okay. So it's like just really helpful to like know what that's like to like pitch a story to an editor. Like with Vogue Business, they have multiple editors. And my piece of advice is when you email a reporter, put in the body of the email like the juicy stuff, because for Vogue Business, there was a PR person who sent me an email and I got 20 emails asked, I could only had
I wasn't really expecting to interview an industry expert. I only wanted to interview in-house retail executives and how they were using AI. But her email, like I could have cut and pasted that into my article. She was like, Benjamin will talk to you about like Trump did this, and here's the data point. It was just like boom, 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 what I needed. And I could tell that she wasn't cutting corners. What my buddy, who's a reporter, he has this quote I stole. His name is Andy, that, reporters can't cut corners. So if he finds a PR person that is really straightforward, not cutting corners, he's more likely to work with them. So I could tell she did her research. She knew exactly what I wanted. She would get her spokesperson on the phone and he would give me like those sound bites I needed. So she got the interview. And then I honestly, a lot of the other inbounds I got were very like, I had to chase them. Like they were like, oh, my client uses AI. And I had to come back with 3 different questions, but like, what kind of AI and, what investment, blah, blah. So I ended up honestly just going to people I trusted.
Right.
So I went to, for example, Edelman, because they have great big clients, and they got me SAP, who put me in touch immediately with, Swarovski crystals. And I interviewed their executive, and I got exactly what I needed. So I think 2 things: if someone's looking for a source, be really clear what you can offer. And if it's not a fit for your client or for your company, suggest someone else, because that'll also make you look really good. Just yesterday, I had a PR person say, like, I don't know much about security, but you might. And I was able to give a source to the reporter, and it made everyone happy and look good. And then next time I go back to the reporter, or my PR colleague goes back to the reporter, they see it as a true relationship and not so transactional. Yeah. So the headline is really give them what they're asking for. And if you're asking them for a favor, like you're pitching them something, you should know them before you're asking them for a favor. And I know it's hard sometimes because people are busy, but if they ever did a podcast or did an interview, for Fast Company, when I was trying to work with them more, I just went to every Fast Company event, and every time I ran into an editor, I said hi to them. Also, I don't think enough PR people send those basic notes of like, I really liked your story. Like if there is a story in your industry, or even just like a fun A-head in the Wall Street Journal that you really enjoyed reading, no reporter is going to be like, boo, you sent me a nice note that you enjoyed the story or made you think. Like people love that. Also, my other secret tip that I'm going to share is the big reason I do events and why they've been successful is like my overall mix of comms is everybody likes to be invited and thought of. When I do events, sometimes I'll invite someone who lives in Oakland, and I know they're probably not going to come, but they like to be thought of. Who knows, they might come to New York, or even better, they'll send a deputy, some other person that they work with. And I feel like often if I trace back how a great opportunity came, it's because I thought of someone and I invited them to something. If they couldn't make it, we got coffee later on. So that's why you'll see me inviting people to things all the time.
I love that. I love your relationship building. That's not an easy skill to just, I mean, people don't naturally usually have that. You have to build that over time.
Yeah.
Just put yourself out there.
I know. And it's so interesting to me because I have, my brother's autistic. And so we have like opposite skill sets, where he's like very thoughtful.
Right.
And into the details, and his social anxiety. It's just fascinating to me because when I was in school, I went to UC Berkeley, everybody was telling you have to be technical, you have to code. And I feel like we're in this renaissance of social skills where AI can code and do technical things, but AI can't be like, you would be a good fit on the podcast, or making me feel comfortable. Listeners, you didn't know this, but the first cut, my dog decided to bark, and we made that fix. Like, those kind of like human interactions. Like I'm loving that that's getting top billing, where before it was kind of, overlooked.
Absolutely agreed with that. And I'm going to ask you one more question, and then just one more question before we wrap up. But it's essentially, I'm hearing that strong external communication really does start internally, and it starts with people like you that are helping coach and leadership teams, management teams, or whomever. Can you tell us a little bit about how you help leadership teams internally align so their external messaging actually feels credible and consistent?
Yeah, I do totally agree with you that employees if the new way of doing modern comms is more of like a 360 approach. So you have like one key message that you want to get out there, and you start with your employees, and then you go to like some of your key stakeholders like lawmakers, investors, and then it goes to consumers. So it really should start with employees. I do think, if your employees don't understand your business model and don't have clarity, then it's like going to be really hard externally, even to the point where I've been in conversations where you have a C-suite and their titles just like don't make sense. And you have to have that hard conversation that like you can use this title internally, but when they get quoted externally, that's not going to make sense to readers. We're going to have to use a different higher level title, or like head of sales doesn't, won't translate externally. It'll seem too quite like salesy and promotional. So I think the best way to get everyone aligned internally is, if you're a publicly traded company, once you have earnings, you have an investor day, like what are those core messages about the business, making sure employees have them, and that should show up in your external comms. I think what we're really lucky about is there's some platforms like LinkedIn, which like is, I'm a huge fan of LinkedIn. There's like a billion active users, and I feel like it's a really great way of like kind of soft sounding or testing your messaging, because there's so many startup founders that don't understand why they're not posting on LinkedIn more, because it's like all your customers are on LinkedIn.
Right.
You can start building this like network of people who have like who would advocate for you and have similar thoughts, and create this group. So when I talk to a lot of comms people, their LinkedIn strategy is actually more of an employee engagement tactic, and the external is just a bonus. I think the easiest way, and this is like very tactical, but when you have a couple spokespeople and you could have the bucket for employee spokespeople, what are their like business drivers that they're overseeing and they're talking to, and then what audiences are under that, and we're with benchmarking and kind of the way that comms tech is right now, it's really great and easy to create a data set of like, these are the key messages we want to get out, and the spokespeople are just the conduits, like they're the ones to deliver the message, and we're not having like these different siloed comms plans. So the 360 plan starting with employees, and then your different spokespeople map to audiences and key business drivers. I've had good luck getting data from like, for example, media outlets, or honestly taking my peers at when I was working at PayPal, we would often go get lunch with the MasterCard team or the Goldman Sachs team and learn from them if they'd just gone through something similar, like a CEO switch, and having that data of like another similar market cap company in our industry. This is what they did. And it was really helpful when they were announcing their new business goals, or they had a new CFO join. I would just think of employees as your first audience, and it makes it so much simpler than trying to do it in separate projects.
Amanda, before we wrap up, and I ask this question to everybody, what is one piece of advice you would give to founders, executives, or communication leaders who are looking to build trust in a noisy world?
My top piece of advice is to not second guess yourself if there's someone you want to connect with. I've had like a tiny bit more time, or it's been part of my business model to connect, and I've been blown away by the people who are willing to get coffee with me. Just before this recording, I got lunch with like a very senior CCO who has a much more tenured career, and he was very willing to take the time. I was at an event, and the editor-in-chief of Business Insider like, let's get coffee. And a lot of old Amanda in my 20s to be like second guessing it and be like, does she really mean that? And I feel like if you I followed up with an email. She immediately copied in her assistant, and it got on the books. And then I feel like something that I love, when you turn a relationship that's like a networking relationship, like you see someone at a networking event and then you turn it into a coffee one-on-one relationship, and you feel like you can reach out to them. And Jamie Heller, for example, she spoke on this panel of senior women in media that I organized with Edelman last year. And I feel like since then I've had such a better relationship with her outlet. So I think no matter who you are, if you're a PR person or a founder, going that extra step to be more personal ask someone out to coffee. If I look back at some of the bigger business opportunities I've had, they started with like a one-on-one coffee. And I actually heard this echoed at the last reporter meeting I had. Someone said that there was a startup founder in San Francisco. He took the onus that he hadn't found the right PR team, and he was in the process of that. But in the meantime, he was like, "Will you just get a coffee with me?" The founder asked the reporter, and she was like, "That's great. I'd much rather hear from you that way than, this funding round goes live tomorrow. Let us know if you want the embargo. You have to let us know in 15 minutes." She's like, that never goes anywhere. But she said the same thing, Raya from SF Standard, that if it starts with a one-on-one meeting, it's the start of a great working relationship.
Love that. It's a relationship focus. I think that's the theme I'm going to be taking away from this conversation today. Amanda, thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah. And I can't wait to get coffee with you when we're in the same town.
For our listeners who want to connect with Amanda or learn more about her work, be sure to check out the links in our show notes. As always, thank you for tuning into Communicating Capital, where we continue to bring you the leaders and ideas that are shaping the future of business, finance, and communication.